you are familiar with, but they are out the back door here. There's also a refillable water fountain if you need some more water. You can have some more bottles up here as well. So thank you all for joining us today. My name is Liz. I'm the program and outreach specialist here. Hi, Liz. So today we have with us Dr. Rebecca Greenwood. She is on Zoom, and Dr. Jamie O'Brien is here with us. They are both assistant clinical professors at BGSU in the physical therapy program. So thank you both for being here with us and presenting today.
We're excited to join you today. If you didn't get a handout on your way in, there are some handouts for today. So if you want notes to take notes or you want notes as you go, those are available for you. Rebecca, can you click to the next slide? So today we're going to talk a little bit about falling and things we can do to stay healthy, to stay active, and to keep ourselves from falling, and some of the kind of consequences or things that can happen when we fall and maybe why we want to think about certain things. So our objectives today are that we really want to think about how we can gain a better understanding of what is a fall, how do we define what a fall is, and then things that might put you at risk for a fall, and then help you to come up with a plan for things that you might be able to change or do to prevent that from happening to you. Next slide. So I want you all to think about, have any of you fallen? You don't have to raise your hands or anything, but you're welcome to if you want to. So if you've fallen, and think about how many times maybe in the past year that you've fallen, okay? And then think a little bit about what caused those to occur for you. For most people, it tends to be kind of a theme or a pattern. I heard the ladies chatting at the beginning, like, sometimes when I first sit up, that, you know, I have to take a minute to steady myself. Or maybe they were all at night or in the dark for you. Or maybe more of them were outside and uneven surfaces or things like that. So just think, are there patterns or themes to any times that you've fallen for you? And kind of just what things were you doing around the time of the fall? Because that'll help us as we think more about some of these things later in the presentation for maybe some strategies that are the ones for you to work on. Next slide. So, true or false? It only counts when you hit the ground. Okay, good. So next slide. The answer actually is false. I heard that shouted out. Because, next slide, Rebecca. Because a fall is anytime we have an unplanned or unexpected event that leads to unexpected contact with a supporting surface. It's a fancy scientific way of saying, I tipped over and I landed on something, right? So this could be you're walking and you stumble into the wall to support yourself, or you have to use the coffee table or the couch to kind of balance yourself. It could be maybe you stood up too fast and you fell back into the bed, but the bed caught you and you didn't end up having to go all the way to the floor. Those things are still considered a fall. Next slide. So when we think about a fall, we want to kind of clarify and just talk about the different things we might consider a fall. So in order for it to be a fall, you don't have to get hurt. It's kind of one of the first things. And falls kind of have a range. So they have this nice little scale of kind of mini fall all the way up to like a more severe fall. Come on in. No big deal. Got two new joiners, Rebecca, so we're just giving them a second to get settled.
Oh, okay, great. Okay. Yeah, I'm not going there. Okay. Hello. I do.
We have this kind of scale where we can rank our falls. We're going to talk about near falls here in a minute. That's the top one on the scale. We can also have a slip or a trip that didn't cause any injury to you. You don't require any medical attention. To the next level where we have a slip or a trip where we got a little bit hurt, right? You had some scraped knees, scraped elbows, things you had to bandage up, take care of. To more serious injuries that could occur as a result of a fall, and we'll talk about some of those too. So falls are the result of something unexpected, okay? We don't typically consider it a fall when we're talking about like your risk for falls or how you might fall. If let's say you were somewhere and somebody you over on purpose. That doesn't necessarily count. And technically, if, let's say you got dizzy or lightheaded from a medical event that happened and you passed out and fell to the ground, that technically doesn't fall into that scope of falls. But I do advise you, if that's something that's happened to you, then make sure you report that to your doctor as well. So that is definitely something else that could cause injury, and we want to make sure that your doctor is aware. Next slide. So I said I'd tell you what a near fall was in a moment. So we just define a near fall as any time you stumble or lose your balance that would result in a fall if other recovery mechanisms didn't come into play. Fancy scientific word. So what that means is if you stumbled and your arms didn't go out, or your arms went out to help you, or like kind of got your feet real wide, maybe you shortened your steps, right? You thought it might be slippery, or you started to slide and you kind of took those little baby steps to recover. All those things are considered a near fall as well. So that means you didn't actually fall, but you had to protect yourself from falling in some way. Your body did what it was supposed to do to help you recover. Next slide. So I want you to think about, now that we've talked about what a fall actually is, if your answers to that first set of questions change. Have you fallen more than you originally thought in your head? Okay. How many times have those happened? And now, are there themes of times when maybe you tripped over and landed back in the bed, or landed on the couch, or just tipped over like a teapot and used the wall a little bit to stabilize yourself? Okay. Next slide. So let's talk about some of the consequences of a fall. Why are we so concerned about falls? As a physical therapist, why am I here saying this is something really important for me to share with you and talk to you guys about? So falls among older adults have higher risks of injury. If you look on this slide, we're seeing that of those who fall, about 37% end up with a hip fracture. And I know that's something when all of you talk to others, that's like the big, I absolutely don't want that to happen to me, right? 20.6% end up with injuries enough that their mobility is restricted for some period of time. Okay, whether that's due to a broken bone or even just because they're so bruised or banged up that they're having a hard time getting around after that. And then some other things that I think are important to bring to light is we start to look at things like loss of independence and depression. So if you fall, you often restrict your activities a little bit. Maybe you don't do as much as you were doing before. And that can make you feel a little more isolated or stuck in your own home. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Somebody trying to listen and they're hanging out in the waiting room. So. Yeah, go ahead. Rebecca, next slide. Okay. So when we think about falls, I think falls are one of those things as a society we don't always tend to talk about. Like we don't tend to say, yep, I was the one who fell last week, guys. Let me own up to it here, right? It's almost a taboo conversation topic. Like we don't just bring it up at lunch and talk to everybody about when we tip over or when we fall. So how common is it really? So if those of you who were, I did see a few of you who were on camp, I'll tell everybody that I fell because it's important and I need to talk about it. Excellent. But 1 in 4 older adults, and we define older adults as those of you over the age of 65. So 1 in 4 older adults reported a fall in a given year. So in the year they did this study, they said 1 in 4 of them actually agreed to saying they had a fall. Obviously, we already talked about that rate of hip fracture. It's the #1 reason that people end up with a hip fracture. And I thought the statistic of every second in the US, there's an older adult who falls. Okay, so it's really common, way more common than we discuss or talk about, 100%. Something else to think about is that it ends up with 3 million injuries in the ER every year and about over 800,000 hospitalizations. So we're not trying to scare you. We're just trying to get you guys thinking about maybe why the second part of this presentation, the what can I do to help myself, is so important. Next slide. So who's the most at risk for falls? The older you get, the more at risk you are. So we see that over age 65, between 65 and 74, we end up with about 26%, so that 1 in 4 number, looking at falls. When we look at 75 to 84, we start to see closer to 29%. And then about a third of those over 85 experience a fall in a year. Okay. Women are on the graph technically a little more at risk than men for falls, but when they corrected the numbers for the fact that women live longer than men, so there's more women in that 85 plus age group, it actually really wasn't much different. Next slide. So something else to think about. How many of you are afraid of falling? If you don't want to answer out loud, think about it in your head. Okay. Is falling something you think about? It makes you a little bit scared about. So if you haven't fallen yet, it may be something that's on your mind, and that's why you're here, right? I'm sure you didn't sign up for a how to prevent falls presentation if you didn't at least have it somewhere on your radar. So fear of falling is considered a lasting concern about falling. It may cause harm to a person, and it may cause you to change your behavior. So stop doing activities that you love or that you're able to do. So when you're asked, are you afraid of falling? Also think about it like this. Many of you may say, no, not really afraid, but I'm just more careful about what I do. Well, if you think about that answer, that really translates into our definition of fear of falling, because you're changing your behavior as a result of your concern. No ladder. For falling. What'd you say? No ladder. No, well, that would probably be a good appropriate modification. So for something I think about in this instance is, there we go, okay, we're back. If a person stops going to the store, or you stop going to church because you're afraid of all the people and how busy it is and somebody bumping into you, okay? Or maybe you stay in more in the winter and don't go out as much because of being afraid of the ice and the snow. Rebecca actually lives in Houston, so she doesn't have to deal with all the fear of ice and snow down there that we have to deal with. Or think about other things about, not going out, maybe not going to your grandkids' soccer games because you're afraid that you're going to fall. Those are all things that tie into that fear of falling. Next slide. So what things, we're going to start talking about what things put you at risk. So we already talked about the older you are, the more at risk that puts you for falls. But there's other things that we're going to talk about throughout this presentation that put you at risk for falls too. So fear of falling may stop you, so you have a fear of falling, may stop you from doing things that you normally do, right? May stop you from going to church or going out into the community. So when we stop doing those things, then we don't stay as strong or as active as we were, okay? Which then contributes to our balance going down, our weakness going up a little bit, which makes us more likely to fall. So see how this can play into a vicious circle. Now I'm afraid of a new thing, right? So at first I was afraid of ice, so I didn't go on my 2-mile walk every day in the ice in the middle of winter. Well, March rolls around, and you may have realized that 2 miles is now a long, hard distance because you haven't done it for a while, right? And then, so I stopped doing 2 miles and I was doing a mile. Well, the next winter, you come back to it, and the mile goes down to a half a mile. So you can see how this progression can happen when we're limiting our activity. So one thing we'll talk about later is ways that we can kind of stay active. Well, boost ourselves being active a little bit. Next slide. So, how many of you know somebody who has suffered a fall? How many of you have had, and it's up to you, your personal choice, preference, if you're not one of the ones who wants to put your hand up in the air. Totally great. How many of you have had a big issue as a result of a fall? A medical condition, a hospitalization, those kind of things? Yeah, oh, quite a few of you, right? How many of you are afraid of falls? More? I think everybody probably is a good, absolutely. I think it does. They haven't studied that very well, but I absolutely think it does. So. Good. So we're going to play a little fun game here called fact or myth. So if you think that what I say is a fact, I want you to give me 2 thumbs up, or whatever thumbs up you have while you eat. If you think what I said is not true, then you're going to give me a thumbs up. hands up, hands down. I roll with the punches here. So, all right. So first factor myth. Falling is something that will happen to other people, but not to me. Got a whole room full of thumbs downs here. Absolutely a myth. Most people think it won't happen to me. We haven't talked about it 24, right? So it's pretty likely that it could happen to you. Click. Next slide. Factor myth. Falling is not a part of normal aging. So the not, I think, might have gotten you a little bit true. It is true. It's not a normal part of aging. We should not expect to fall as we get older. Okay. So there's a lot of things that you can do to reduce your risk of falls and to help yourself prevent falls. And that's where we're headed here in just a moment. Next slide. If I limit my activity, I won't fall. We just talked about this one, right? Yeah, it's a myth. That's a myth. So, so remember, it precipitates that weakness then that causes you to be more at risk for a fall later. Eventually, when you have to stand up, that's when you'll fall. That's a great way to analyze it. Great job. So a lot of us think that the best way to prevent falls is just to stop doing things. We kind of already talked about that perpetuates that cycle of getting weaker and weaker, losing some of our abilities. So one of the best things you can actually do is stay active and get exercise. I heard some chatter at the beginning of this session that several of you were like, hey, what about those exercise classes that are here? You guys have such a huge, amazing resource at this building for a lot of you as well. And then social activities are great for your overall health. So doing the best you can to get out. You guys are already doing that. You're here, right? You're making your way to this building. So next slide. Factor myth. I am less likely to fall if I'm at home. They're like, oh, we caught on to her theme. So myth, over half of all falls actually happen when you're at home. So that things that are in your home, what are things that you guys think could lead to tripping or falling in the house? Pets are a big one, actually. Throw rugs would be another one. Pets. I know my dogs would trip anybody, so I understand.
Things out in the aisleway.
Good. So clutter would be another one. Great. Stairs, if your balance has gotten poor, yeah, that could be a difficult thing for you. I heard ladders earlier, that there's certain times maybe we decide ladders aren't our friends anymore. Yeah. Poor lighting. So how many of you have a harder time in the middle of the night when you have to get up to go to the bathroom and get in there?
I have light.
So some of you have already got situations for night light or things. Perfect. That's exactly. So there are some simple home modifications that you can do to help with some of those things. One would be, especially if you have throw rugs, if they're necessary, to put grippers on the bottom so the rugs themselves don't bunch up or get all slippery. Thinking about things like, do you need a handrail or a second handrail in certain places? Grab bars in the bathtub in case you were slipping and sliding there. For non-slip pane, I know sometimes even at my house, right, we go out and let the dogs out in the morning and a little flick, so like that non-skid can be helpful. Good. Next slide. So factor myth, I can increase my muscle strength and flexibility as I age. Yeah. True, good job. So it is a normal part of aging that you do tend to lose some muscle mass and you do tend to lose some strength. Oh, thank you. Is it this one too? Yeah, okay. But it's never too late to start an exercise program that will help you to build strength and muscle. You can continue to build strength and muscle. And 100% if you're scared of falling, that getting that exercise and getting stronger is one of the best things you can do. So even if you've never exercised the whole day in your life, it's possible to start now. Okay. Next slide. This is a tricky one. So taking medication doesn't increase my risk of falls. I would agree with how you guys are interpreting this. I was a little nervous for this one. So please don't stop taking any prescribed medications as a result of this conversation. Yes, ma'am.
If you're taking something like Ambien,
Mhm.
sleep, I think it does affect.
There are absolutely some medicines like that that could, especially if you got up in the middle of the night and you were more groggy or things like that. So that's definitely something to think about. So any medication can have an impact on your fall risk. And that's just something you need to make sure you're discussing with your doctor and your pharmacist about, especially when you start a new medication. The biggest time people have issues with medication is when they start a new medication. So if you started a new blood pressure medicine, and it may make you a little dizzy or lightheaded those first few days. If you started a new sleep medication or some of those things, just make sure you're asking about that ahead of time, and then make sure when you're first starting it, you're being extra careful, taking your time when you're getting out of bed, some of those kind of things. If it's persisting, then definitely, mention something to your doctor if you're getting dizzy or lightheaded or any of that kind of stuff. Absolutely. And next one. Dr. Myth, I don't need to get my vision checked every day. Another false, you guys are on to me. So vision is actually another big piece of false risk. So just think about it, if you can't see well. Now this can be vision as in like, I can't just see in general, but it can also be how we see in different lights. So if we're looking at low light situations when it's a little bit more difficult for us. So those people with vision impairment are twice as likely to fall as those without. How often in the middle of the night do you try to get up and walk without a glasses on? I know my husband doesn't make it to the bathroom very well without his glasses. So, if you notice that, especially in that low light situation, or even in reading situations or things that your vision's a problem, there are people whose job it is to help with low vision. They're called low vision specialists. And that's definitely something you could ask your doctor for a referral to, somebody to help you in that situation. All right, I get to pass the stage over to Rebecca for a little bit here. So.
Good morning. Thank you guys for having me. It's very exciting to be able to tune in from Texas. So I'll actually be up there next week. So I'm bracing myself for real cold because we think it's cold here right now, but it's only about 35. So the question I'm starting with is, are falls preventable? And the really good news is that the research says 60 to 75% of falls can actually be prevented. And so that's what we're going to look at next is risk factors and then how to lower those, which is in looking at being able to go into prevention. So there's two types of risk factors that we're going to talk about here. So you have modifiable risk factors. So these are things that can be changed, and then the non-modifiable things. So these are the ones that we cannot change. We're going to start with those because those are a little briefer. So some of the risk factors that were mentioned earlier, age, we're not going to make ourselves younger. If you've had a history of falls, gender, taking more than 4 medications, poor vision, but we are going to talk about some ways that we can help with that, but that is a risk factor and you're not going to be able to automatically change that. Any loss of feeling, ethnicity, chronic disease diagnoses, and any memory deficits. So these are the things that we know, you can be aware of and realize that the risks are higher, but knowing that these really can't be changed. So let's get into the important part, which are the ones that we can't change. So these are our modifiable risks. So we start with the internal risk factors. So these are kind of things within yourself that you can change, and then we'll get into the external ones. So the first one's physical inactivity. And so Jamie talked about that already. The more active we are, the better, but not doing a lot is definitely much more of a risk factor. That leads very much into the next one, which is leg weakness, as well as into poor balance. So both of these are risk factors, but both of those can be improved. Improper use of the cane or walker. So canes and walkers are great, but we have to be using them right, or they actually become a risk factor in themselves. Medication, again, was already mentioned, but it's really important to always keep that in mind. Low blood pressure when you're changing positions, poor vision or poor correction for it. So again, getting those eye exams, and then as well as that fear of falling and social isolation. But yeah. So then let's talk about more of external factors. And so stairs are a big one, especially if they're uneven or they don't have rails. And so it's kind of funny, but I'll tell a story. So when my parents still lived in California, they moved out here a couple of years ago. They lived in a house they'd been in for about 15 years. And they had this set of stairs, it was about 3 or 4 stairs into the garage that they just had a friend of them theirs built. And these stairs were different heights each step. And the last one was like 2 steps worth. And to them, this wasn't a big deal. It drove me nuts every time I went out there. And they only had railing on the side you don't walk on normally. And so it just, especially with what I do as a physical therapist, it drove me absolutely nuts. But to them, it was normal. And I'll talk about some of that later. But we kind of get really tuned into our own house and don't notice these things because we're used to taking that same step and our bodies adapt amazingly. So any kind of trip hazards, unsecured rugs, not having grab bars, especially in bathrooms where it can be real slick. Really low chairs, toilets, or sofas actually are something that are as big a risk because it's a lot harder to stand up from something low than something a little bit higher. Poor lighting was mentioned before. Cabinets and storage that aren't easy to reach. So again, if there's something you're getting into a lot, you probably want to keep that closer to you and not be reaching very high or very low often. And then that way, when you do it, you can be a lot more careful with it. Narrow doorways or paths become really important because if you're using a cane or a walker, some type of assisted device, you actually aren't going to be able to use it properly if it can't fit through that space. And then any kind of uneven or wet surfaces. So the next thing we're going to go through here is understand we're going to go through a checklist. And so this is coming from the CDC and we're going to go through each question and you should have a copy of it in the handouts you got. And the important thing, whether you use the handout or you just mark down or keep track, we're looking at how many number you have at the end. And so most of these are with 1 point, but the first
Hold on a
2
second, Rebecca,
Yep.
1 second. So at the back of the packet, right behind where the PowerPoint slides are, there's a big version. So you don't have to try and read it on that tiny little slide. And if you have a pen or something, you could mark your scores as you go along as well. If you want one, I have probably a few extra in my bag too. So it's right after the PowerPoint handout. So it's the first page, I think, right after the PowerPoint.
Not my lifetime.
It's so tiny on the handout, Rebecca, that nobody can read it. So we're trying to give them a second.
That was the vision check part.
One more page. No.
Even with my mask on.
Did everybody find it? Okay, I think you can go ahead now, Rebecca.
Okay. All right. So if everyone's ready to keep track here, we're going to go through each question because I'm going to talk a little bit about why they matter. And so the first one here, the first statement is, I have fallen in the past year. And so if you've fallen in the past year, knowing what the definition are now, you're going to mark the yes or no on that. And this one is 2 points for yes and 1 point for no, and it should be on that handout. And why does it matter? So the biggest thing is we already learned that's a risk factor, but if you've fallen before, you're more likely to fall again. So our second statement here is, I have been advised, I use or been advised to use a cane or walker to get around safely. So this one's also 2 points for yes, 0 points for no. And why does this matter? So this matters because if you've been advised to, there's something in you that, someone's looked at and said, hey, this would help, or you've realized in yourself that this would help. And so that does put you at more of a risk to have a fall. And so our third statement here is, sometimes I feel unsteady when I'm walking. So these go, the rest of them are 1 point for yes and 0 for no. And so why does this one matter? So feeling unsteady or needing support while you're walking is actually a sign of poor balance. So for number 4 here, I steady myself by holding onto furniture when I'm walking at home. So it says yes or no. And then why it matters, this is also a sign of poor balance. So if you feel the need to put a hand out onto the back of the couch or something as you walk by, that's kind of showing that the balance may be a little off and you're looking for more input for it. Number 5, I'm worried about falling. So we talked about that earlier. And again, why it matters is that if you're concerned about falling and worried about falling, it does actually make it more likely to fall because that whole cycle of reducing activity. All right, so number 6 is I need to push with my hands to stand up from a chair.
Okay, if it's couch, that counts too. Yep.
Yes.
So can you, the question is, can you stand up without using your hands? If you can't, and you feel like you consistently have to use your hands, then give yourself the points for that one. Yes, ma'am.
If the chair is flimsy, it's more dangerous to not hold on.
I would agree. So evaluate that one based on kind of if you're standing up from a normal chair versus, yeah, a flimsy card table chair. I think we can all get credit for holding on to that one.
And we encourage you to hold on when needed. So there's times you need to, but the big thing is that if you always need to hold on to something to stand up, then that's a sign of muscle weakness, which is then a risk factor for falling. Now, it becomes habit sometimes of just being cautious to always use your hands. Doesn't necessarily mean you're weak, but if you do it often enough, it could actually result in kind of weakness over time. So, but anytime it's, a flimsy card table or something really low, it's a good time. It's a good time to use your hands and help yourself out. So the next one is I have trouble stepping up onto a curb, and we're just going to say a regular curb here. We don't need to worry. There are some really high curbs around, but just a regular curb when you're out walking. And this one's important again, because it's another sign of muscle weakness if you have difficulty stepping up for that height. Now, statement 8 here is I often have to rush to the toilet. Now, this is really important because it kind of sets you up in a scenario that if you're rushing all the time to the toilet, and this is even more important at night, it increases your chances. So just, you're hurrying for something, you're not paying as much attention, but then even more so at night where you're talking about you may have less lighting, you're sleepy, you're not paying as much attention, and having to hurry is not really ideal. Statement 9 is I've lost some feeling in my feet. And so this one matters because any numbness in the feet it actually makes it more likely to stumble because you're not getting that same feeling coming in. Our feet actually give us a lot of messages about where we are. So they may not feel something and you're more likely to trip, which could lead to a fall. Number 10 is I take medication that sometimes makes me feel lightheaded or more tired than usual. And so this is important because those medications, those side effects from medications can increase your risk of falling. Like Jamie said earlier, we don't want anyone to stop taking medications, but we want to be cautious of, and again, we just want to understand our risks that if we do feel that way on the medication, it is a risk factor for falling. So the next one is, and I think I heard someone mention Ambien earlier, but I take medication to help me sleep or to improve my mood. And so this one's important because these medications sometimes can increase your risk of falling, and especially at night. So by them helping you to sleep and helping, which is great, and sleep is extremely important. At the same time, they do have side effects, and one of them can be that you're at increased risk of falling. And so the last one is I often feel sad or depressed. And this one matters because these types of symptoms of feeling depressed, feeling down, not feeling well are very much linked to falls. Okay, so we've gone through all 12 questions, and so I'm going to give everyone just a minute. So what you want to do is add up all of your yes answers and the number of points. So the first 2 are worth 2 points each. The rest of them are all with 1 point.
And we're here too. If you need help adding them up, let us know. Liz and I can walk around and do that. So.
Just let me know, Jamie, when it's a good time to continue.
Give it just another minute. Having a contest over here, Rebecca, to see who had the highest score, I think.
Yeah, so we're ready for the next step. For how do we lower our risks? Of course, my contractors are being quiet right now, so.
All right, are you guys ready? Are you done with the math, or do we need another moment? I think we're pretty much ready to move on, Rebecca.
Okay. So the important thing is, one, it helps you kind of identify yourself, but most importantly is if you scored 4 more points, you may be at an increased risk for falling. And what you want to do is then on the next few slides, we're going to start getting into how to reduce that risk. And this is where you want to tune in and kind of look at some of these and say, okay, here are some ways that I can help that, knowing that I am at an increased risk. So the first one, of course, we're physical therapists, and so physical activity is our love in the world. So the first one is physical activity. And so we always put out there, if you're not used to exercising, if you're not cleared for exercise for any reason, always talk to your doctor before starting a new program. Anything that you do to sit less and move more is helpful. And so the most important thing for anyone at any age for becoming more active is find something you enjoy to do. And if you are forcing yourself to do it and you don't enjoy it, it's just not going to be ideal. If you want to become more physically active, and you might have some of these other specific concerns, that's when you talk to your physical therapist for it. So part of what we do is we're evaluating, we're looking at different things, and then we can set individualized treatments for specific dizziness, strength, balance, moving, walking better, and even help with that fear of falling by working through some of that. And so if you feel comfortable kind of starting on your own, but if you're dealing with any of these other ones, this is where we really come in and we want to help to improve these things. One option is always participating in an evidence-based fall prevention. You can look at a senior center, some health departments have them, community centers, there's some offered online. The important thing is you look at kind of the level, maybe observe a class first and make sure that it's at the level that's right for you. And so they do go at all different levels, but you don't want to jump into something, if it's too easy, you're not going to get as much benefit. And if it's too hard, it's probably not a good fit because it's not as safe to do. So really trying to kind of feel out different options. And then I'm also really big on, doing it with someone else, doing it with a friend or a loved one is always going to help you stick with it. So that becomes really important. So the next one we want to talk about here are environmental considerations. So we touched on some of this. So some of the big ones: remove potential fall hazards, throw rugs, secure them to the floor. Anything that's on a low shelf or a high one, you want to move to where it's easiest to get to. So bending over really low frequently is going to increase your risk, but at the same time, getting on a step stool or a ladder a lot or reaching really high, that's going to do it too. One thing to keep in mind is occupational therapists and physical therapists can also help identify these issues. That is another thing that we can do at times, is come through and do like a home evaluation with recommendations to make it safer. So this is a really good checklist here. And so I just want to put out there really quick that I mentioned it before, but it's really important to know that when you're looking at your home yourself, you are less likely to see everything. And so I think of it as, like in my garage, we have a little lip to get in there and a little higher step, at the end of the garage before you go into the house. And when you live somewhere, you stop noticing these little things because your body just knows to step up every time right there, to step over something. So if you have someone available, and have the checklist, you can kind of go through each other's homes and find those things, because you'll be surprised how much more a new set of eyes actually sees things that you're so used to stepping over that pair of shoes right there that you don't notice it. So we'll go through these real quick. So
Hold on a second, Rebecca.
Yep.
There is a big version of that is right behind the checklist that you filled out. It looks like this. Next, so I think it's the page a lot of you tried to be on when you were filling out the other checklist. Yeah. Go ahead. They were all shuffling papers looking, so I was trying to.
Yep. Thank you very much. It's so great to have someone there in person. Can't quite see that on that little screen. So again, I'll kind of highlight a couple of these, but you guys will have this, but it's just a really good way to kind of walk through the home objectively, kind of by the rooms. And so when you're looking at stairs and steps, and so the first thing is there anything on the stairs or the steps? Are we looking at shoes or books or anything like that? Are any of them loose or uneven? Do you have if you have a set of stairs that you go up and down, is there a light at the top and at the bottom that you can turn on and off? Because that comes really important for that. If you only have one at the bottom, it's going to get really dim at the top. Does this area have any burnt out light bulbs? Is there any carpet that's loose or torn? Because again, this can catch on your feet. And any handrails that may be loose, or are they only on one side? Because if they're only located on one side and you're holding something maybe in your hand on that side, you don't have that available. So ideally it's on both sides. Walking through a room, you're looking, do you have to normally kind of walk around different things like furniture is kind of on the setup? Keeping that more of a straight shot through a room is better instead of having to walk around a lot of things. Again, the throw rugs keep coming up again and again and again because they're actually one of the biggest risk factors, kind of around the home of they kind of flip up or they're loose and they can slide out from under someone. So again, anything else on the floor, and then looking for anything like, are there wires, are there cords, anything like that that may be crossing the pathway. Getting to the kitchen, I talked about this before, but anything on a high shelf. And then if you do use a step stool, they actually have step stools with a bar attached to them. So you have something extra that's really stable to hold on to, and then never using a chair as your step stool. So that's a real big risk factor right there. So if you do need to get into higher cabinets, if you're getting them a lot, try to move that stuff lower. Otherwise, looking for a safe way to get up and get things. We're talking about the bedrooms. The big one is having some kind of light source, like a lamp or something close to the bed. So when you're getting up at night, you can turn something on, even if it's really dim. And then the path from your bedroom to the bathroom, if that's real dark, again, it's kind of like trying to walk with your eyes closed. And there's actually, like I have in my house, I have little plug-in night lights that are actually red light. Then the nice thing about red light is it doesn't interfere with sleep cycles, but at night, it's just enough to keep it lit. I'm up with kids in the night, so I like to have a little bit of light going on. And then looking at either, some nonstick mats or maybe putting strips, down on the floor in the shower. And then grab bars are always a really, really great thing, because if you don't need them today, you might need them tomorrow. And the sooner you have them available, the better. So let's talk, we touched on vision again. So the first one is always, always, always getting those eye exams. Our eyes change over time. You really want to stay on top of it. So after the age of 50, you want to make sure every year you're getting that exam. So I want to talk for a minute about bifocals and trifocals. And so with my dad, the first time I ever realized he actually had some issues with his balance is we'd gone to an outdoor stadium thing and he was walking down the stairs and could not do it without holding on to somebody. And he had always been fine before. Well, we realized, especially walking down, he wore bifocals all the time. And so you're looking downstairs and looking through the part of your glasses that are actually meant for up close. So he just he couldn't see the next step at all, and that type of thing. So when you're deciding which kind of glasses to have, keep that in mind, that when, you want to be able to look down at where you're stepping, and those bifocals really do interfere with that. So it may be worth having glasses that are not, especially if you're going on steps or stairs pretty regularly. It's, having cataracts removed may actually decrease your chances. And so it is a surgery and you've got to weigh everything both ways, but by having removed, that can improve your vision, which in turn is going to help decrease those risks of falls. And then like I said before, using night lights in your bedroom or hallways. And so we talked about before, but any problems with your feet, any numbness, those types of things are going to increase your risks. And then let's talk about shoes really quick. So I'm guessing up there, people don't walk around in flip-flops a lot, but it's actually a problem down here in Texas because
Not
year
in
round.
January, but
What's
in the
that?
summer maybe.
Yeah,
Not in
maybe in the
January, but
summer.
in the summer we do.
But things like, with flip-flops, these are really easy to catch. They don't fit real well. They're, on it, and they catch the edge of things all the time. And so they don't set up well. But any type of shoes, people sometimes want to get shoes that are bigger because it's just easier to be able to slip their feet in. But you really want your shoes to fit well. It really makes a big difference. The next one's the soles of your shoes don't have enough tread. So if you're looking at the bottom and it's worn down, that can get really slick. I walk on trails here a lot and they get wet really easily. And I know as soon as my tread's low on my shoes that I walk in, because I'll step somewhere and that's just, normal walking, and I get that little slide and it's like, okay, let's let's get these new shoes going, because that makes such a difference. And the last one is if you wear socks only around the house. There's a couple of options with those. They have socks that actually have, tread on the bottom. So if you're really committed to socks, or some type of slippers or something, but again, we want them to fit well if you're walking around with them. So walkers, canes, and falls. So it's really interesting. So at least half of older adults who use a walker or cane were never measured for fit or trained properly on use. And this becomes really important. So either they decide on their own, or oftentimes they're told by the doctor, or they're handed a walker or cane, and no one ever stopped and fitted for them, made sure they're using it right, that kind of thing. And so the first time my dad, after a back surgery, was given a walker, he treated it like an accessory and carried it half the time. And so which drove me nuts. If he couldn't fit through a doorway, he just picked it up and carried it along with him. And I said, Dad, that's not how this works, But that's, again, where physical therapists come in. If we know how to measure with it, we know how to fit for it, and we'll talk through kind of best use and safe. And then 75% of those who fell were not using their prescribed walker or cane at the time. So if you're supposed to use it, even though you may not want to, sometimes it becomes really important to then use it how you're directed to, because it really does help a lot. So I'll go quick on the medications. We touched on this before. So being on 4 or more increases your risk. Side effects of blood pressure, sleeping meds, and any of those can make you dizzy, which is increasing your risk. So here's kind of a couple tips for safety on that. So the first one is using only one pharmacy. And the reason is because they always have track of all your medications, and they can see if anything's interacting, or maybe if you get a new one, maybe something else should have stopped, but they're more likely to be able to catch errors that might get through. Ask for an annual medication review. So they, once again, looking for things that interact, making sure everything's appropriate. Be sure you can read your labels. So they print those really small. So if you need, something to magnify them, or someone else to help you, to always make sure you're taking the right doses, or to plan ahead. And then any over-the-counter medications can interfere with your prescribed one. So always check with your pharmacist before taking anything over the counter. So talk about blood pressure real quick here. And so there's something called postural hypotension. And this is actually where your blood pressure drops really low. So if you think of the time where you stood up fast and got lightheaded, that's that hypotension. Usually you recover, but it is something to be very aware of, because this can increase the risk of you falling down. So the biggest one is check your blood pressure regularly. And it can be high, but it can be low. And maybe you were put on some blood pressure meds and they're not really appropriate anymore because your blood pressure is getting lower and lower. You want to know that too. So either high or low, you just want to kind of be checking it pretty regularly. If you get dizzy normally when you stand up, it's really important to talk to your doctor about that. And so the things you can do in the meantime, sit for a minute before, if you get out of bed, sit there for a minute before you sit all the way up, and pumping your ankles before you get up kind of gets things moving and can help with that.
Hold on,
And
I have a
again,
question, Rebecca.
Oh, go ahead.
What does that mean? Just move your feet?
Like sit and do this, like tap your toes, wiggle your feet around a little bit.
Okay.
You can even do like little marches or kicks. That'll help just kind of get the blood pumping back up. So especially when we're laying down, sometimes when we first sit up, it can like all fall down into our legs. And it just takes a minute for your body to kind of readjust and re-regulate.
Okay, my husband did that.
Yeah. And there could be lots of reasons why, like when you get up fast that you fall, but one of them can just be your blood pressure kind of drops a little and you need a minute to kind of readjust. So
Move your like lower leg.
yeah, so sit at the edge of the bed until you're not dizzy anymore, like tap your feet, kick your legs, do a little bit of moving around, let the dizziness kind of subside, then get up. And you may need to move a little when you first go from sit to stand too, before you kind of go take a nap. She's back. All right, I think we're good. Sorry.
Nope, you're good. Thank you. Thank you. And then another one is just anytime if you get a new, because blood pressure medications have this effect, anytime you're given a new blood pressure medication, really be cautious in the beginning. So take some time, be aware that for first few days as your body's adjusting to this, you can be a bigger risk. And so keep that in mind. So we kind of, we did a risk screening for today, but I want to go through kind of things that would change, that could change your fall risk. And so any changes in your medication could do that. Any changes in your health status, so an illness or an infection, we get debilitated sometimes very quickly, and that can then increase it. So just keep that in mind if you're coming off being sick. Any new onset of pain, lack of sleep, sadness or worry, a recent reduction in activity level, any change in your use of cane or walker, any change in your vision prescription, and then any move to a new home. And so any of these things, it's a time to kind of be aware that says, okay, these are changes in my life, and this could increase my risk of falling. So what do we do if a fall occurs? And so the first thing is, don't get up right away. You want to check for injury, and you want to call for help if needed. So it's better to just wait, give yourself a minute. You may not feel things right away, but give yourself time to. If there's any possibility you hit your head in the process, seek medical attention. And so even if it's not hurting real bad, it doesn't seem that concerning. If there's any possibility of your head, you really want to get checked out for that. Always notify your doctor of it. And then after the fact, you want to check for any hazards that kind of contributed to this. Again, we talked about pets before, but they're a big one. That's a hard one to do, but our pets are definitely a fall risk. And then the other thing to keep in mind is we don't normally get on and off the floor a lot in our lives. And so it's something to keep in mind that if you do see a physical therapist, that's something you can ask them for. And before a fall occurs, it's something they would be able to teach you how to do to get back up safely if you did fall. So in summary, older adults are at an increased risk for falling. You discuss your fall risk and prevention plan with your healthcare provider, and then knowing how your risk can be modified. And I will turn it back over.
So I heard a couple of great comments towards the end of kind of her thoughts that I just want to make sure everybody got to hear those comments. Some things like, if you do fall or you're concerned about falling, what strategy do you have in your own home to make sure you can get help if you need it? Was a great question. So some of you may have the button. You wear a smartwatch. A lot of the Apple Watches are now starting to have a fall detection device. So if your kids and grandkids are bugging you about a good Christmas present, that may not be a bad idea for something in that option as well, especially if you're not ready for having a help. I've fallen and can't get up button. The watches are actually starting to have pretty good detection ability for that fall. It'll detect that you didn't move for a period of time after like a big perturbance, and it can auto call 911 from your watch. So that's kind of a cool thing too. I also heard make sure you have a way to keep your cell phone with you when you're up and moving around the house so that you're not stuck somewhere, because I think probably the worst thing that can happen if you fall is then to be stuck there and not be able to get help if you need it. Okay. If you have more questions on those, I'm happy to provide some ideas or tips for that too. So we talked about a lot of these things already, but our goal today is that you come out of here with a plan. So we've given you a lot of things to think about, a lot of ideas or things to think about. Our goal is, what's your plan? What are you going to tackle first? Okay. Somewhere in that packet, maybe you got a note down to yourself of all the things we talked about. What are you going to tackle first? Maybe it's as simple as, when I go to fill my prescriptions next month, your pharmacists are crazy with COVID right now, but say, hey, do you have time to meet with me and review my medication list? They might say, we're drowned right now, I can't do this 5 minutes, but either I can set up an appointment with you to come back and do that, or can I call you later? There might be some other opportunities for how to review that. Or the same, the next time you go to your doctor's office, if you want to check ahead of time, hey, can we review my medications? I just want to make sure nothing's going to cause me any problems or issues. That's a small, easy one that you can check off later. Yes, ma'am.
With one of them there to use one pharmacist.
Yes.
If you're taking a med that you're on a long-term basis, to get it on a 90-day subscription from a mail-in.
Right.
And so then you're only using the pharmacist locally for
those extra short-term
10
ones.
or 15, yeah, and they have to be coordinated.
So yes, that's a great point. Some insurance company, I know my insurance company has the same problem. They make me mail in most of my big prescriptions. And so if I do take you know, oh, I have a UTI and I need to go get a short-term antibiotic, that may not sync with my pharmacies. And so, yeah, keeping a full med list and making sure all your providers have it. And when you go to the pharmacy, like, here's my full list. I just want to make sure this doesn't interact with anything else. So that's a great tip, and great point, because while we all want to use one pharmacy, that's not always 100% possible for everybody. So, food for thought, just, yeah, keeping that list in your wallet or keeping it in your pocket so that when you have one added or changed for a short-term option, I'm moving.
I keep mine in my phone.
Oh.
And the meds I take.
Yeah, or notes in your phone. If you're a tech person, notes in your phone is a great way to do that as well. Absolutely. Another would be if, you know, home was the biggest thing that popped up for you on your list, to talk to your doctor about seeing if you can get an appointment with an occupational therapist or a physical therapist to do a home eval and come out and look at your home. Or even with that check sheet that you had working with your kids or your family to say, hey, can we go through some of this list and see if there's things we can improve in here easily. Checking with a physical therapist. So if you are nervous or you were a fall risk on today, you know, even step one would be getting in touch with your doctor and saying, hey, I went to a training and they said I'm at risk for falls. And she said one of the things I could do was either go get PT or start exercising to help. So making that first point of communication. Next slide. So our goal is that everybody comes out of here today with kind of at least one thing, hopefully a plan of here's things I'm going to do. Liz has some amazing class offerings here. So if you want to get moving, I know Rebecca talked about like, how do I find that just right level challenge? I've looked at your guys' list. You guys are super lucky at this location. But there's chair-based exercise classes. So for those of you who don't move quite as well, that would be a great starting point. Tai Chi for some of you who are moving better. And I think Liz knows her classes really well, that she could point you kind of, hey, why don't you test this one first? And then once you feel comfy, we can move you up into one of the ones that's a little bit harder. I think a lot of the classes also have modifications where you can use a chair or something if you normally wouldn't have to as well. So those are all great, easy things kind of to check in. Next slide. So our big point, remember, we're going to ask you to move on. So it could be as little as if you already wear a watch that has like a pedometer or a fitness tracker or something, like I'm going to get 200 steps more today this week, and next week I'm going to add an extra 200 steps. So start adding that. Okay, and 200 steps is actually not very much. So little things like that as well. We want to thank in preparing this presentation. There are a couple task forces out there that have put together some really great presentations already, and we based our presentation largely off of one from the American Academy of Geriatrics, their fall prevention task force, and the CDC study task force. And those are both also great pieces to go if you want to Google some more information to look at. We have a bunch of links here as well that are kind of places that have great evidence-based information on fall prevention. The CDC has some of the handouts at the back of your packet are from the CDC's page. They have some really great resources, as well as this NC National Council on Aging as well. And that is that. We cited a whole bunch of fancy evidence that you're welcome to look if you're a research nerd like Rebecca and I. I'm around. Rebecca can also hang out on Zoom if you have questions for us, but we're here. That's part of why we're here, to help you figure out how to stay safe as best you can. So thank you for your time. We really appreciate you. Yep, I think there's a packet of them right there. That ends our formal presentation, so I'm going to stop the recording, which may have stopped itself already.